So you have chosen to join me on the topic of doing thumbnails. As boring as they may seem, they are super, super, super important. Repeat after me. If you don't do a thumbnail before you start an illustration, you're gonna work halfway through and you're gonna realize, maybe this doesn't really work out. It's falling flat. Something doesn't look right. And if you had done a proper thumbnail beforehand, then I will say that that problem will never happen. And even if it does happen, it's much easier for you to fix because you've already identified in the beginning, like, okay, this is the strong overall type of feeling. The thumbnail has a strong composition. Even if a couple of things are here out of place, you can always fix it real quick. So when I did this illustration here, I did this real quick sketch right here to lay out sort of the general idea of how I wanted the whole illustration to look like. I definitely ran through a couple trial runs of this, but I only managed to keep this sketch. But as you can see, initially my idea was that I thought this water would be transparent and you would get to see her body, and then you would see much darker foliage in the background. But the end product, I scrapped that and then decided, okay, maybe I'll just do a reflection here to sort of fill in this kind of empty space and bring the viewer's eyes down. And you kind of lost some of that dark composition, and instead I created this sort of dreamy bedroom kind of close, intimate vibe. And so today we're going to be talking about thumbnails and looking at good old compositions from masters in traditional art, in movies, and in my example works, right? So let's bust it out. So here I have a couple of artworks and two movie stills from some really old movies, so I don't get copyright claimed. This is from Breakfast at Tiffany's, and this is some old Western. I think it's called like something in the West. Obviously, I don't know what it's called. But let's start with this painting. That's Japanese print that's called The Great Wave off Kanagawa, and it's a really famous piece if you haven't ever seen it in like tourist shops or like t-shirts and that kind of stuff. It's basically abused and used every single place you can think of. And so most people, when they talk about this piece compositional wise, they're going to refer to this idea of the golden rule. And what's that, right? Well, the golden rule is just basically this mathematical formula that was created back in the good old Renaissance days. And the whole concept was that these little ratios create this perfect curve that will end up looking something like that, or I don't know, whatever it is. But essentially, it's the idea that this golden ratio, this curve, is found in everything in nature. And if you're able to implement that in your art, that means it's going to automatically, with the snap of your finger, become super aesthetically pleasing to the viewer's eye. I don't work that way. I am not smart enough to do all the calculations required in order to implement this crazy spiral that will go through all throughout your piece. I work more on instinct and purpose of the story. And so in my opinion, I feel like when I look at this piece, I feel like because we want to highlight that the wave is in full focus with maybe the people like sort of just sitting here, that's why you kind of place it real smack center right here, and it helps that you put it off center because it helps touch the edges of that composition. So essentially you're bringing the viewer's eyes from the edge towards here, and since there's this empty space here, obviously you're going to start looking towards this way, right? If you put a smack in the center, let's say we put the wave smack center, right? Wouldn't you think that it's a pretty boring composition? You lose some of that action that you get from having this side of the canvas touching the wave. You also don't even see the boats anymore that often, and so you kind of feel like, oh, what's this wave doing? Why do I care about a wave, right? It's just a wave. That's why this artist was really smart and decided to push that wave over and create this swooping effect where your eye gets to travel all the way around the whole canvas, right? In this one, in Breakfast at Tiffany's, we can see them employing the 2/3 rule. So the 2/3 rule is basically the idea that you want to have your main subjects occupy about 2/3 of the canvas. And so here, the main character occupies about a little more than 1/3, but you can see that the main focus is on this general region, right? She's looking at the jewelry. I never watched the movie, but from what my sister has told me, it's something to do with like her elegance or class or something, and apparently these diamonds are like pretty important to the story. So Story-wise, it is a smart choice to have these jewels taking up most of the composition. And then you just stick a figure here that's much darker in value to kind of lead the viewer's eyes inward towards the main focus, right? This piece right here is called the Allegory of Painting or Art, I believe, by Vermeer. And he's a master artist from the good old, I believe it's the Baroque period. My art history is a little rusty. But regardless, you can see how he entices viewers' eyes towards the main focus. He doesn't put the subject like smack center. He puts them slightly to the side. And that's really essential for most compositions, is you don't put everything smack center, because smack center compositions tend to fall flat because they don't help the viewer's eyes move around the canvas, and it makes it really easy for you to notice the asymmetry of a lot of things. And so whenever you're able to put things on tilt a little bit, such as putting this curtain here to block off some of that space, placing the main subjects off to the side 2/3 of the way, even putting the floor line about 2/3 or 1/3 of the way, depending on where you measure, 2/3, I guess, or yeah, 2/3, or 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, 1/4. And this whole repeating of the rectangles, but they're not like directly like this, but they're kind of side, off to the side, varied everywhere. You have some angles, and angles also help direct the viewer's eyes inward, right? So this composition all works out because they're actively trying to push the viewer inwards and not trying to say, oh, be so obvious, oh, just look at this, and then not have the viewer work a little bit, right? From this movie still right here, I assume from the angle of the camera work and the position of the characters, I assume that the story is creating this mood of like a conflict between these two, right? From having a worm's eye view right here. I'm a little worm, hello. Worm right here, watching everything going on. That's where we as the camera are occupying. It creates this foreboding sense of like doom because we get to see this side of the face that we don't typically see. Like the underside of the chin, I don't think is ever really flattering angle for anyone. And so it sort of distorts his proportions, and it makes him seem really tall, a very imposing character, versus this character that is smaller in the back, who's maybe challenging him. And this is done by placing the skyline really low down. And so the sky occupies about 2/3 of that whole canvas. And that creates a very interesting thing for the viewer to rest their eyes on. So in contrast with our focus of these characters, our eyes get to rest a little bit on these clouds. And then these dirt floors isn't that interesting, but it can be like visually chaotic for the viewers to look at. Hence why maybe you wouldn't want to put them, say, as like the 2/3 part of the composition. Imagine if you had like 2/3 of the bushery here, I feel like you would definitely lose the attention of the characters, which is why the director was really smart in making that sort of framing choice. As for the second one right here, it's also another very famous piece in art history, and it's called Ophelia, and it's by, I believe his name is Millet, a French artist, and he worked during the realism period of the art world, and the whole idea is like he's trying to create this very drab, very mundane kind of perspective, but that's playing off of the old story, the old play with the character Ophelia where she drowns herself or something like that. Super depressing, but you can see again he employs like the 2/3 rule where our character is sitting like in the lower half and not sitting just smack in the middle. Like just imagine if Ophelia was just smack in the middle, right? Imagine she was smack in the middle here, right? Wouldn't that make for a very drab composition, right? I'll just cover that up so you don't see it. Right, then there would be too much equal space between the top and bottom, and I feel like as a viewer, you get kind of bored if you're just looking at the same thing over and over, because bushes are bushes. It's not like he added some crazy new element to them. So the fact that he places her lower serves as a visual interest, but also it helps create the feeling that she is actually sinking into the water, right? If she's lower down here, we get the sense that there's like this impending sense of doom. Something about watching someone floating on water from like a higher angle makes you feel sort of like contemplative. And by doing so, you can see how he has the sides of this grass touch the edge of the composition, but never really directly in the corner. Because if you're in the corner and smack like this, it can get boring again real fast. So try not to have all four corners occupied equally. So he covers up this edge, right, like this. This side he leaves empty, so your viewer's eyes are able to move this way. And you can see this part of the shrubbery here curves to bring the viewer's eyes back this way. And the composition, having her lying sort of at an angle, gives the viewer a little more interest, as we can see sort of her expression and a little bit more of her dress, but also the angle of these two hands just creates some dynamicism in the overall piece, because it is somewhat of a still piece. There's no like crazy energetic brush marks that you might see in impressionist paintings like with Seurat or like Vincent van Gogh. And because it's like realism is realism. It's like a photograph, right? So you're going to try to create interest through angles, composition, lighting, etc. And with this painting right here, might not be as well known, but it is called Wanderer Among the Misty Mountains, I believe. And it was from the Romantic era, and you can see how empty the background is. But there's like such a strong silhouette here that it creates interest for the viewers to look at this as a whole and like sort of say, okay, this adventure is not necessarily supposed to be the main focus. Maybe we're supposed to be focusing on what he's looking at, or maybe it's the opposite. We're not supposed to focus on the background and we're supposed to focus on this guy and why he's standing in the middle of nowhere with his leg propped up all cool and stuff. And again, you see sort of the sky takes up a majority of that composition. He doesn't do the same two mountains. This mountain is definitely different than this mountain. Like you can see, this one's like two hills, this one's like one giant hill. He has only one mountain here, and then he balances that out with like a slightly different mountain. These two mountains are not quite at the same height, right? The clouds in the background aren't even, and that helps create like these gorgeous like negative space that you can see. And the term negative space just refers to the space that's around your line or like your main subject. So say if I drew an apple, colored that baby in, and put a good old, I don't know, books behind it or something. And this is my canvas. This right here would be referred to as your negative space. I guess this is your positive space, but I have never heard anyone say that. But if you want, we can all call it positive space in this particular class, right? And so you can even see that his leg is like creating an angle that helps lead the viewer's eyes upwards. This mountain, super uneven, but it covers these two edges of the canvas and helps like close it off so the viewer's eyes don't just wander down here and feel like it's missing something. This part can be empty because the whole vibe is like, oh, super free, super vast kind of thing. Whereas down here, you want it to be more grounded, you want it to close off, so you're only forced to focus at this particular scene. And then get another beautiful negative space right here. And the fact that he makes the choice to have the person facing away is a choice that you make early on during your thumbnailing stage. And if you don't play around in your thumbnailing stage, you could make the mistake, like if this traveler was turned around, you kind of lose some of the mystery behind this whole painting, right? And the dreaminess, kind of mistiness of the mountains. And I have one final screenshot we can analyze before we try doing some sample, like how I actually do thumbnails. And so looking at this movie screenshot, you could totally already tell this guy is the top dog or the main character of this movie. And how do you know that? It's because the framing works that way, right? You have all these characters looking towards him. They're blocking off the background and they're framing him. This guy's framing him. This bit of empty space allows the viewer's eyes to rest just a bit, but then we get back into framing him. Right? The angles of the stairs point towards him. This angle of that table points towards him and cuts off this empty space and helps create a really interesting negative space. The stairs point sort of towards him, like they lead you down this way, and then your eyes are drawn in by the sheer mass of people, right? You can't help it. Like, even if you want to say, no, my eyes automatically got drawn to that empty space behind the chairs. No, don't lie to me. Your eyes were immediately drawn to these people right here. And that is the purpose of the director. He purposely cluttered the heck out of this space around this character. So your eyes are forced to be like, oh, what are they all looking at? Oh, this guy. So this is the scene. We're looking at this guy and his reaction to whatever just happened. Like, I'm guessing his horse just jumped onto stage and started like dancing and asking for money or something. PG, we're PG. And so let's try a sample thumbnail. Let's think of a story, right? All right, so say I want to do a story about someone looking at their reflection in the sink, right? So what are some ideas that we can do, right? We can do a horizontal composition or vertical. Now for this situation, I feel like I want a more movie-like feeling, right? And in that case, you're gonna probably want a horizontal composition. And so whenever you're doing thumbnails, you're just gonna do real quick, real breezy little sketches of ideas. So I'm just gonna draw a bunch of these rectangles, get them in there. I'm gonna bring back our favorite character, Leah, and we're just gonna play it around. Maybe I want to block her in right smack in the back right here. She's in silhouette or something. And she's like, what? Tilted over a sink, staring at her reflection right here, right? Maybe that's her good old reflection, and maybe there's like sink right here. And maybe I'll close off that empty space by putting like a makeup bag or the edge of a towel or something or whatnot. And in this composition, you're going to see that we're all drawn towards this, right? I'm forcing your eyes towards this. I closed off these areas by making them sort of in shadow or whatnot. So you have no choice but to look at this particular image. It's not bad, but I think we can do better, right? Let's try one where we actually see Leah's face, right? Maybe she's looking down at her reflection right here. And you're not going to see the actual reflection, you're just going to see her reaction to it. So we're employing the 2/3 rule, making sure we're not smack center, we're just slightly off center. Makes everything a little bit more interesting to look at. Maybe put a fake flower here or something, or maybe something more significant. The sink right here. We're taking the position of being a fly on the wall or something. Maybe it's a raggedy shower curtain or something. The tub. Bathroom door. Maybe this is like a really tight bathroom, right? Or maybe this is not a shower curtain. Maybe we're in like a public bathroom that's absolutely disgusting. I don't know. But look here, we're doing super general, super generic. not even caring too much about whether or not we're getting anatomy correct. We just want the overshadows, the overall shape, and whether or not we blocked in a good composition, right? Maybe there's graffiti, that kind of stuff. Okay, so in this composition or thumbnail, we're seeing that we're focusing on Leah's expression, right? But I don't know, something about it feels flat, like we didn't really cover the tops of this composition, so I probably won't use it. Let's try another one. Maybe this time, let's try a vertical composition. Maybe that will fit my fancy, right? I know I said I wanted a movie vibe, but maybe the vertical one will work better because you'll get that kind of crazed that mirror, and then maybe there's a ghost. Maybe that's why she's staring in the mirror and she's like, huh? I mean, this be a pretty spooky one. And this one definitely does change the focus to a more character focused kind of illustration versus like a more environment based illustration. This one tells you a little bit more story through what stuff she has in her environment and whether she's like in a steampunk or like in a more fantastical environment, or if she's in a totally random gas station bathroom that's disgusting, right? We're gonna try one more time with our horizontal one. Let's think. Maybe we want one that's where she's facing downwards smack. And this is the only situation where you would have a really central composition. And when you have a central composition, that means you gotta be careful to make it unbalanced everywhere else, right? So whether or not it's adding some kind of jacket here that she's holding, a knife here, or like a sword or something, or a gun or something sitting on that bathroom, or some clothes that she threw off because she got hurt from a fight or something. And now she's looking at her reflection because she's like, oh my god, what did I do? Or who have I become? That kind of vibe, right? And so it just depends on what type of story you want to do. It can totally change depend on the story. And so like you can see from just these three like basic compositions, my goal was to try to cover up these edges, create that 2/3 rule, right? And try to tell a story as effectively as possible. And the best way to learn how to do these types of thumbnails is to study old masters or take a movie and draw the compositions of those. So we're going to go back to our movie examples and we're going to practice doing compositions and values of them, right? So, because I can just tell you what's going on, but to be able to do it on your own, you really have to build up the intuition that you're going to get from seeing good examples of composition. And then later on, you can start like manipulating those type of things to fit your artwork, right? Art comes from art. No art is unique. And so might as well jump in board, right? Start learning from the masters. So this one, pretty long composition just because it is a movie. And so we notice that he is in silhouette slightly. And you can see that in movies, the storyboarding artists would probably just do stuff like this, where they throw in a really quick storyboard that maps out like the silhouettes of the characters, just like this. And so this is like another method you can take when you're trying to do thumbnailing, is to get silhouettes rather than try to actually draw out the figures, because that might be easier for you to visualize, like, oh, I need to cover up the space with this value, or like I need to put something here, I don't know what yet, but I'll see how it goes as it comes in, right? You can see I basically am just doing little like blobs of people. You're not even seeing that much detail going on. And you can imagine with the film crew on like tight schedule, this is what they only have time to do, right? Get ourselves a good old silhouette here. That's blocking off this scene right here, blocking off the scene here. And you can see without that character on that stair, it's gonna look empty, right? Hence why the director just added this extra right there, even though he probably served like literally no story purpose. Even the chairs, I feel like, why the heck are there extra chairs if you're not going to use them, right? And that would be an example of like a really quick film study. Like, I imagine that the film crew probably did other iterations where maybe the main character was standing off to the side, and then you'd have like a whole bunch of people like this looking at it. Same concept, but maybe it doesn't hit as effectively in the director's opinion, in which case it's very subjective, right? Compositions, how they make you feel. Like, this equally could be interesting, but it does fall just a little bit flat just because you lose some of that angle that you get from having that 3/4 perspective. So we can try doing another one. We can do the one for Breakfast at Tiffany's. Especially if you love watching movies, this is such a great way for you to just pass the time and like add a little bit of extra learning while you're watching the movie, is taking screenshots of it and then practicing drawing those like screen stills, because movie directors are surprisingly really amazing at framing and composition and evoking an emotion so quick. So why not just learn from them, right? So you see here, we're making sure that our character is standing off to the side. And it helps fill up that bottom edge so you don't get any weird kind of gaps. And having the curtains here frame the shop with your little cones and stuff. And I must say that this portion right here isn't necessarily like the most visually interesting to look at, which is why I believe the director doesn't show you too much. Because if you had shown like this much more I feel like it's too much and it's kind of boring to look at. Like, I'm not here to look at marble walls. I'm not like an architect or like a builder looking to find the perfect material for a house that I'm making. And you can see like this really bright light here isn't quite in the center either. But it helps bring attention to, say, like the brightness of her breakfast, right? Or say even the brightness of like the jewels that are sitting on those jewelry stands. And we'll just do one more kind of study using a painting, because these paintings are like basically everywhere, so long as you just browse through, like, say, your local art museum. Like, go to your art museum and just sit down, do some thumbnail sketches, and learn how the old masters do it. Let's try doing one Vermeer, because Vermeer is such an amazing artist. He's able to create such intrigue in his paintings, and it's almost as if you're being let into like this tiny little intimate moment. And first off, you're gonna notice you're gonna want to block off this whole section. And already it feels like he's gotten your attention, right? You have this huge block here that forces your eye this way. Then he breaks up that space, right? He makes it obvious that these are two different lighting sources. This light that's shining this way casts like a lighter area right here, helps against break up this chunk. He breaks up this empty space here by placing some books and stuff. And then he separates the foreground and the background using value, right? So this whole section is like a lot lighter than these shadowed silhouettes right here. And he brings back your attention by adding a darker figure right around here, in contrast to a semi-lighter character in the background right here. And you can see everything's like basically off center, right? There's no one single thing that is like smack in the middle, and that's what makes it so interesting for us as viewers to look at, because we're constantly moving around trying to capture, okay, where's the focus? Where do I look at? What do I do? And just like that, by having a strong light source, he closes off this right spot by casting it into shadow. So the viewer's eyes are forced to be drawn back in towards this super bright light source that is then framed by a super dark silhouette, in which case it appears even brighter and it catches your attention even more. And so that was just like a really quick lesson on the basics of how to approach drawing thumbnails. Obviously, if you go on the internet, you're going to see like a ton of like really specific examples of the types of thumbnail or compositions you're going to see. Stuff like a triangle composition or like an S-shaped composition or like a radiating line. And I feel like that for me gets really confusing really quickly. And so the way I like to always approach it is just to think about, am I activating all sides of the edges? Am I allowing the viewer to move their eyes around and over the canvas, right? So that's why with like S-shaped compositions, it's really easy for you to like activate the viewer's eyes just because it's going from the top corner or the top edge all the way to like the bottom edge, and it like breaks up that middle section into smaller, much more interesting negative spaces. But basically the idea is that if you're ever struggling to practice composition, what you do when you go out to nature is put your two thumbs into L's, right? Put them together, make a rectangle, and use your eye and try to create like a composition of like a scene that you're looking at. See if you can put it in a relatively interesting way, because you will instinctively feel whether or not it is interesting to look at or not. Like even you would know that you don't want to put a flower like smack in the middle with too much space at the top or bottom, right? And so I leave you with the words like, if you're struggling to do thumbnails or compositions, learn, practice from film studies, from old paintings, from books, looking at nature, because all those things will help you build that intuition in order to actually do your own composition. And as always, story is key, so don't worry if you're not able to do a very effective composition right now. It takes practice, and as you do them more and more, just run them through and you lay them all out at once. You're going to notice like which ones feel more dynamic, which ones work better, and that should be helpful for you in the future as like a growing artist, because this is not a one day I learn it immediately. Like you give me a list of these compositions, I immediately know how to apply it, right? No, it's about building that intuition basically. So I will see you in the next section where you are finally going to get to touch color. I have prevented you from even having a sniff of color, because getting into color is like a whole different beast. There's so much to talk about, and hopefully I will be able to cover it all within the time limit, but I'll try to maximize my time, try to condense it as much as I can, and we'll see how it goes, right? Later.